The impact resonated through the training hall like a thunderclap, a visceral, nauseating collision of bone against flesh that made every witness wince. This wasn't the familiar rhythm of sparring, the controlled contact of practice drills. This was something darker. A knee strike delivered with calculated viciousness, aimed precisely at the vulnerable muscle of the newcomer's thigh. She made no sound. No scream, no protest. She simply collapsed, her body folding inward as waves of shock traveled through her nervous system. Her fingers clawed at her leg, knuckles bleaching white from the pressure. The polished floor was cold against her cheek as she curled into herself, unable even to gasp. Above her stood the perpetrator, a young man with satisfaction playing across his features, arms crossed as he waited for the inevitable surrender. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this moment of cruelty would ignite a response so devastating, so surgically precise, that it would fundamentally alter everyone present. This wasn't just another gym story. This was the day a predator mistook a warrior for prey. The Arizona desert blazed outside with merciless intensity, but within the Fujinami training facility, the atmosphere was controlled, almost clinical. This wasn't your grandfather's traditional dojo with creaking floorboards and fading photographs. This was a modern combat laboratory. Brilliant LED arrays flooded every corner with surgical brightness, reflecting off walls covered in deep navy padding. The floor was an immaculate honeycomb pattern of interlocking wood panels, so perfectly maintained you could see your reflection in the finish. National flags hung in precise rows, American stars and stripes alongside the banners of Japan, Brazil, and Thailand, each representing a martial tradition honored here. Equipment racks stood in military formation, holding an arsenal of training gear, focus mitts, Thai pads, heavy bags, and an array of practice weapons. Each piece positioned with exacting care. This was a temple of discipline, a forge where ordinary people came to be tempered into something harder. Into this meticulously ordered world stepped a figure who seemed entirely out of place. Maya arrived at 19, moving through the space like someone constantly braced for impact. Her posture was defensive, shoulders rolled slightly forward, head tilted at an angle that suggested perpetual vigilance. While others wore the crisp uniforms of dedicated practitioners, she dressed in civilian clothes, a faded olive military surplus hoodie, worn denim jeans that had seen better days, and combat boots that were functional rather than fashionable. Her dark hair was gathered in a simple ponytail, though rebellious strands had already escaped to frame a face that held stories no one had bothered to inquire about. But it was her eyes that told the real tale. Deep brown, almost black in certain light, they never rested in one place for long. They swept the room in systematic patterns, cataloging exits, measuring distances, identifying potential threats with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom such assessments had once meant survival. To the casual observer, she simply appeared frightened, timid, out of her depth. The other students certainly read her that way. And one student in particular was already calculating how to exploit that perceived weakness. Jake dominated the social hierarchy of the dojo with the easy confidence of someone who'd never faced genuine consequences. Tall and athletically built, he moved through the space like he owned it, radiating an arrogance that came from years of being the biggest fish in a very small pond. His clothing choices broadcast his disdain for convention, a blue and gold varsity letterman's jacket worn brazenly over his GI pants, a violation of the dojo's dress code that somehow went uncorrected. His background was plastered across the walls in the form of tournament photos and championship plaques, high school wrestling dominance, local MMA victories, the golden boy who could do no wrong. Two younger students, Leo and Mark, orbited him constantly, reflecting his sneers and amplifying his commentary. They wore proper GIs, but their loyalty was clearly to Jake rather than any martial principle. When Sensei Roberts, a weathered man in his mid-50s whose calloused hands and steady gaze spoke of decades on the mat, called for partner drills, it was like watching a shark detect blood in the water. Close quarters work today, Sensei announced, his voice carrying the authority of earned respect. Thai clinch entries and knee strike mechanics. Find a partner. Jake's attention locked onto Maya with predatory focus. He crossed the mat in long, deliberate strides, Leo and Mark falling in behind him like courtiers trailing a prince. "Looks like you're flying solo, new blood," Jake said, his tone dripping with false generosity. "Today's your lucky day, I'll partner up with you." "Don't worry, I'll take it easy." Maya's response was barely audible, almost swallowed by the ambient noise. "That's not necessary. I can work with someone else." "Nonsense," Jake insisted, his grin widening. "It's practically a privilege, right fellas?" Leo and Mark provided the required chorus of agreement. Around them, other students found sudden interest in their shoelaces, their gear bags, anything that would avoid drawing Jake's focus their direction. The drill commenced. The objective was straightforward: practice establishing the tie clinch, controlling an opponent's posture, and executing controlled knee strikes against pads. The emphasis was on technique, on building muscle memory through repetition. Jake, however, had a different curriculum in mind. From the opening seconds, his grip was excessive. Rather than guiding Maya's head into position, he wrenched it downward with unnecessary force. His forearms ground against her neck, not to secure a proper clinch, but to cause discomfort. He yanked her off balance, pushed her back, pulled her forward, a constant barrage of rough handling disguised as instruction. Maya's response was to freeze. Her movements became wooden, uncertain. Her hands fluttered weakly at his controlling arms without conviction. Her breathing turned shallow and rapid. She presented every characteristic of someone completely overwhelmed. "You've got to show some backbone," Jake announced loudly enough for the entire class to hear. "This is combat training, not interpretive dance. You're weak. Seriously, why are you even here?" Nearby, Leo and Mark exchanged amused glances while holding focus mitts for each other's strikes. The mockery was a group activity. From his position overseeing the class, Sensei Roberts watched the interaction unfold, his expression darkening. His arms crossed over his chest, jaw tightening. He took a half-step forward, clearly wrestling with the decision to intervene. "Jake," he called out, his voice carrying a note of warning. "Control your intensity. This is a cooperative drill." "I am controlling it, Sensei," Jake responded without releasing his grip on Maya. "She just can't handle basic training." "Not my fault." The harassment escalated minute by minute. Jake's demonstrations grew more aggressive, his commentary more cutting. He critiqued every aspect of her performance: her stance too narrow, her grip too weak, her breathing too fast, a relentless verbal assault designed to humiliate. And Maya's silence seemed to fuel him further, her apparent helplessness an invitation for more abuse. But something was changing in her eyes. The initial fear was being burned away like morning fog under intense sunlight. What replaced it wasn't the hot, explosive anger Jake was projecting. It was something far more dangerous, something cold and calculating, a transformation happening beneath the surface. Then came the moment that shattered any pretense of legitimate training. Before we continue with what happens next, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We share stories of resilience, unexpected power, and the triumph of the underestimated. You'll want to see how this unfolds, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming in future videos. ****. Jake secured a crushing clinch, his arms like iron bands compressing Maya's neck and head. He drove his weight downward, forcing her to bend at an awkward angle, compromising her structure entirely. Her face was nearly parallel to the floor, her body twisted and vulnerable. "Now watch the knee strike," he announced to the room, playing to his audience. "You drive upward, right into the thigh muscle. Deadens the leg completely. Takes all the fight out of them." He pulled her head down further, torquing her entire body into an even more compromised position. And then he executed the strike, but this wasn't the light, tapping contact of a training drill. He loaded his full body weight behind it, drawing his knee back like a coiling spring before releasing it with explosive force. The target wasn't the padded outer thigh meant for such drills. He aimed for the nerve-dense inner quad, the kind of strike that could actually cause damage. Crack. The sound reverberated through the sterile air like a gunshot. It was ugly and final, the acoustics of genuine violence. A collective gasp rippled through the watching students. Maya's body went rigid for a fraction of a second before her legs completely gave out. She dropped like her strings had been cut, hands immediately clamping around her thigh, fingers digging into the traumatized muscle as shockwaves of paralyzing pain radiated through her entire leg. Her face contorted, eyes squeezed shut, body curling into a protective ball on the cold, hard floor. Jake stood over her, not even bothering to hide his satisfaction. He nudged her foot with his own. "Come on, up you get." That was barely a love tap. "Going to quit already, princess?" Leo and Mark had abandoned their own drilling entirely, watching with a mixture of shock and perverse admiration for Jake's audacity. Sensei Roberts was moving now, his face dark with genuine anger. "That's enough. Jake, my office, now." But before Sensei could cross the distance, before Jake could take a single triumphant step away from his victim, something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere of the room. The change didn't announce itself with drama. It began small, with the cessation of pained gasping. Maya's breathing evened out, became deep and controlled. The hands that had been clutching her thigh in agony slowly relaxed their desperate grip. She pushed herself up, first to her knees, then, with a grimace that spoke more of determination than suffering, to her feet. The ascent was deliberate, almost ceremonial, like watching a storm system organize itself on the horizon. The entire dojo froze. Every eye fixed on the new girl as she underwent a transformation that defied explanation. She rolled her shoulders back in a simple, fluid motion that completely reconfigured her presence. The hunched, defensive victim evaporated. In her place stood someone with a spine of tempered steel, someone whose posture spoke of hard-won authority. She took a single limping step toward the equipment rack, her right leg dragging slightly, clearly damaged but functional. She bypassed the gloves and pads. Her hand closed around the rubberized training knife, a 16-ounce prop used for weapons defense drills. She turned back toward Jake, and when her eyes met his, several students actually took involuntary steps backward. There was no anger in her gaze. No fear, no pleading, no pain. Just a flat, unnerving calm, the absolute certainty of a predator that has identified prey. It was a look that had witnessed things far worse than a bully in a high school jacket. She tossed the rubber knife. It skidded across the polished floor, coming to rest at Jake's feet. "Pick it up." Her voice had transformed entirely. The whisper was gone, replaced by a low, clear tone that carried unquestionable authority. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed in situations where disobedience meant death. The silence deepened, became suffocating. Jake stared at her, his confident smirk flickering like a candle in wind. This wasn't following the script. Victims stayed down. They didn't get back up. They certainly didn't issue challenges. "What did you just say to me?" he blustered, trying to reassert dominance through volume and aggression. "I said pick up the knife," Maya repeated, her tone utterly devoid of emotion. "You wanted a real lesson in combat. You think fighting is about landing the hardest strike. It's not. It's about what you do after you've been hit. It's about surviving and responding. Now you have a weapon. Come on, varsity athlete. Show me what you've got." A tremor of nervous energy passed through the spectators. Leo and Mark exchanged glances, their earlier amusement replaced by dawning unease. This wasn't entertaining anymore. Sensei Roberts, who had been closing in to separate them, paused. He saw something in Maya's eyes, a look he hadn't encountered since his own time in uniform in a very different part of the world. He slowly lowered his hand and took a deliberate step backward, granting the floor to whatever was about to unfold. Jake, his pride now publicly challenged, scoffed to mask his uncertainty. He bent and retrieved the rubber knife, holding it awkwardly like someone unfamiliar with the weapon. "You're insane. You actually want me to stab you with this thing? You can try," Maya said simply, settling into a stance that bore no resemblance to the clumsy postures she'd displayed during the drill. This was low, balanced, efficient, weight distributed perfectly, hands up but relaxed, favoring her uninjured leg. It was the stance of someone who had applied these techniques in contexts where failure meant death. Enraged by her calm, by this challenge to his carefully constructed dominance, Jake let out a frustrated yell and lunged. He was strong and fast, a legitimately capable athlete. He thrust the rubber knife straight toward her midsection in a clumsy, telegraphed attack. Maya didn't flinch. Didn't retreat. She flowed. Her body pivoted on her good leg in a blur of economical motion. The injured leg, the very one he had knee-struck, became a weapon. As she rotated, her left arm swept outward in a precise arc, not blocking but redirecting his knife arm to the outside. It was a deflection that left his entire body exposed and off balance. In the same continuous motion, her right hand, fingers stiffened into a spear point, shot forward and hammered into the side of Jake's neck, directly over the carotid artery. Thump. It was a dull, sickening sound. Jake's eyes bulged. He made a choking, gurgling noise as the rubber knife tumbled from suddenly nerveless fingers. He staggered backward, clutching his throat, breath coming in ragged, insufficient wheezes. But Maya wasn't finished. The predator had been unleashed, and predators complete the hunt. As he stumbled, she closed the distance with practiced efficiency. Her right leg, the very leg he had brutalized, whipped up in a savage low-line roundhouse kick. The hard bone of her shin connected with the exact spot on his thigh where he had knee-struck her. Crack. This sound was even louder, even more brutal. A scream, raw, shrill, stripped of all masculine bravado, tore from Jake's throat. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. His leg buckled instantly and he crashed to the floor, writhing and clutching his leg, mirroring exactly the position she had been in moments before. The dojo had become a tomb. No one moved. No one breathed. Leo and Mark stared in absolute, uncomprehending terror, their earlier confidence completely shattered. Maya stood over Jake, her chest rising and falling steadily, the cold fire still burning in her eyes. She looked at Leo and Mark. "You too." Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You thought it was funny." They shook their heads frantically, faces drained of color. "Get him out of my sight," she commanded. They scrambled to obey, fumbling as they tried to hoist a sobbing, incapacitated Jake to his feet. They half-dragged, half-carried him toward the locker room, his cries echoing off the walls, a complete spectacle of humiliation. Maya watched them disappear, then turned her gaze to Sensei Roberts. The fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a profound weariness. The mask of the warrior slipped, and the haunted 19-year-old girl became visible once more. Without a word, she limped to the bench where her bag sat, every step clearly causing fresh pain. Sensei Roberts approached slowly, cautiously, the way one approaches a wounded animal that's still dangerous. "Who are you?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying new respect mixed with genuine concern. Maya didn't look at him as she unzipped her olive hoodie. Underneath she wore a simple black t-shirt, but as she moved, the hem rode up, revealing the top of a thick, angry scar that ran diagonally across her lower back. It was the kind of scar that spoke of trauma, of emergency surgery, of something that should have been fatal. She pulled a small, worn ID wallet from her bag and handed it to him without comment. Sensei Roberts opened it with trembling hands. Inside was not a driver's license but a military identification card. United States Marine Corps. Her photograph stared back, stern and unwavering. Her name, Maya Flores. Her rank, Lance Corporal. And in the corner, a designation that explained everything: Combat Instructor, MCMAP. Marine Corps Martial Arts Program. She wasn't a scared new girl. She was a combat veteran, medically discharged after an improvised explosive device had torn through her convoy in Afghanistan, shattering her spine and taking the lives of 2 members of her team. The dojo wasn't a place for her to learn to fight. It was physical therapy, a desperate attempt to reconnect with her body, to feel strong again after being broken both physically and psychologically. The knee strike hadn't just been bullying. It had been a trigger, violently yanking her back to a desert road and the sound of an explosion. And in that moment, the training, the instinct to survive and neutralize threats, had taken over completely. Sensei Roberts handed the ID back, his hand shaking slightly. He looked at this young woman, this warrior who had come to his dojo seeking peace and had found only more violence. I'm so sorry, Lance Corporal. Maya simply nodded, slipping the ID back into her bag. She shouldered it and began her slow, painful walk toward the exit, not looking at the other students whose faces now reflected awe, shame, and dawning understanding. The silence that filled the dojo was no longer mere shock. It had become something heavier, a living presence thick with the weight of a lesson learned at brutal cost. It was in that silence that the true aftermath began to unfold, not in dramatic declarations, but in the quiet, seismic shifts occurring within every person present. Sensei Robert surveyed the faces of his students, the wide-eyed teenagers who had come here to learn toughness, to earn belt promotions, to emulate the Jakes of the world. He watched as their cheap fantasies of violence shattered against the hard, unyielding reality that Maya represented. Their concept of a beatdown had been borrowed from movies and video games, a triumphant finish, a victor's pose over a defeated rival. What they had just witnessed was not a victory. It was a dissection. It was the difference between playing soldier in a safe, bright room and knowing the taste of sand and blood and fear. The permanent reminder of a scar that would never fade. Maya's limp was a more powerful lecture on consequence than any he could deliver verbally. And Jake's cries from the locker room served as a stark reminder that the pain you casually inflict on others can be returned 100-fold, delivered not with hot rage but with cold, professional precision that leaves marks on the soul as well as the body. This was the story they would carry forward, the experience that would fundamentally change how they understood strength and weakness and the quiet, haunted people who walk among them holding worlds of pain and power behind carefully controlled expressions. Maya paused at the door, her hand on the frame, her back to the room. She didn't offer words of wisdom or triumphant declarations. There was no victory in her posture, only the heavy weight of burdens she would always carry. Then she stepped out into the blinding Arizona sun, leaving behind a silence louder than any violence, a lesson in humility, trauma, and true strength that none of them would ever forget. The story of Maya is one of hidden scars and the explosive power that lies beneath quiet surfaces. It's a powerful reminder that you never truly know the battles someone is fighting, the wars they've survived, the training they've received. Her response wasn't about revenge or dominance. It was about survival, a brutal, automatic reaction from a warrior who had already sacrificed too much. In the days that followed, the ripple effects continued to spread through the dojo and beyond. Jake returned to training 3 weeks later, his swagger permanently diminished. He moved differently now, with a caution that hadn't existed before. The injury to his leg had been significant, deep tissue damage that required physical therapy. But the deeper wound was to his perception of himself, his place in the hierarchy, his understanding of what real strength meant. Leo and Mark drifted away from him, their alliance revealed as the fair-weather friendship it had always been. When Jake needed them most, when he was vulnerable and humiliated, they had scattered like leaves in wind. That lesson cut deeper than any physical strike. The other students treated the space differently after that day. The casual roughhousing diminished. The careless cruelty that sometimes infected training environments seemed to evaporate. They had seen what real violence looked like, witnessed the difference between combat sport and combat survival, and the distinction sobered them. Sensei Roberts implemented changes as well. He established clearer guidelines about training intensity, created better systems for matching partners appropriately, and most importantly, began every class with a reminder that martial arts training was a privilege that carried responsibilities. He spoke often about the difference between strength and cruelty, about how true warriors protect rather than prey upon the vulnerable. Maya never returned to the dojo. Sensei Roberts tried calling the number on her intake forms, but it had been disconnected. He drove to the address she'd listed, but the apartment was vacant. She had vanished as quietly as she'd arrived, leaving behind only the memory of that afternoon and the lessons it carried. Some students speculated that she'd moved away, seeking a fresh start somewhere else. Others wondered if she'd given up on training entirely, the trigger too powerful to overcome. Sensei Roberts privately hoped she'd found somewhere safer, somewhere she could heal without being forced back into survival mode. He kept her intake form in his office drawer, along with a note he'd written but never sent: "Lance Corporal Flores, you deserved better from us. You deserved sanctuary and received violence. I hope you found peace. If you ever want to train again, you will always have a place here, and I promise you will be safe. With respect and apology, Sensei Roberts." The story spread beyond the dojo's walls, as such stories always do. It moved through the local martial arts community in whispers and rumors, each retelling adding or subtracting details. Some versions painted Maya as nearly superhuman. Others focused on Jake's downfall. But those who had been present knew the truth was more complex and more tragic than any simplified narrative. Jake's parents threatened legal action initially, but once Sensei Roberts explained what had preceded Maya's response and mentioned the witnesses who would testify to Jake's deliberate attack, they quietly dropped the matter. Jake himself never spoke about it publicly, though those close to him noted a profound change in his personality. The arrogance had been surgically removed, replaced by something that might eventually grow into genuine humility. One student from that day, a quiet girl named Sarah who had always trained seriously but without fanfare, approached Sensei Roberts several weeks later. "I've been ing about Lance Corporal Flores," she said. About what she must have experienced to react that way. About what she was trying to find here. "What do you think she was looking for?" Sensei Roberts asked. "Not to be the strongest person in the room," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "But to feel safe. To rebuild herself. And we, Jake, took that away from her. Made her fight again when she'd come here to heal." Sensei Roberts nodded slowly. "That's a mature observation. It makes me wonder how many other people are dealing with things we can't see," Sarah continued. "How much pain people carry quietly. How easy it is to become Jake without realizing it, to use our strength to hurt rather than to protect." That conversation stayed with Sensei Roberts. He incorporated it into his teaching, using Maya's story, without naming her, as a cautionary tale about assumption, about respecting training partners, about understanding that you never truly know what battles someone is fighting. Years later, he would occasionally search for her name online, hoping to find some indication that she was thriving somewhere. He found military records confirming her service, found her name on a memorial website for veterans of her unit who had been killed in the IED attack that wounded her. But of Maya herself, her current life, her recovery, he found nothing. He chose to interpret that silence optimistically, that she had successfully moved forward, built a life beyond her trauma, found peace away from the combat she'd been forced to bring into his dojo that afternoon. The knife she'd used remained in the training equipment rack, but Sensei Roberts found he could never use it in drills without thinking of her. Eventually, he retired it entirely, placing it in his office as a private reminder of the day he'd failed to protect someone who had already sacrificed enough. The lesson Maya taught that day extended far beyond the immediate violence. It spoke to the hidden depths within people, the survival skills forged in crucibles most would never experience. It revealed the profound difference between the performance of toughness and The reality of having survived genuinely dangerous circumstances. Jake had been playing at being dangerous, enjoying the power his physical advantages gave him over others in a controlled environment. Maya had actually been dangerous, had been trained to neutralize threats efficiently, had operated in environments where hesitation meant death. When forced back into that mindset, the results were devastating precisely because they weren't theatrical, they were functional, brutally efficient, and completely devoid of unnecessary flourish. The other students learned that strength exists on a spectrum they hadn't previously understood. There's the strength of the athlete, honed through competition and training. There's the strength of the bully, wielded as a tool of dominance over the vulnerable. And then there's the strength of the survivor, forged in circumstances so extreme that it becomes something else entirely, a survival mechanism that exists below the level of conscious thought. The knee strike from Jake had bridged the gap between the safe present and the dangerous past. In that moment of impact and pain, her nervous system had reverted to combat mode, had seen Jake not as a bully in a high school jacket but as a threat to be neutralized. The response was automatic, unavoidable, and overwhelming. For those who witnessed it, the lesson was profound: be careful how you treat people, because you never know what capabilities they possess, what traumas they carry, what triggers might activate responses you're completely unprepared to handle. The golden rule took on new weight: treat others as you wish to be treated, because the consequences of cruelty can return to you with devastating precision. As the months and years passed, the story of that afternoon became part of the dojo's lore, a founding myth for a new culture of respect and awareness. New students heard about it, though the details grew hazier with each retelling. But the core lesson remained clear: this is a place that respects the dignity and safety of all practitioners. This is a place where strength is cultivated to protect, not to dominate. This is a place where we remember that everyone is fighting battles we cannot see. And somewhere, perhaps in another state, another city, another dojo, Maya continued her own battle, the long, difficult work of healing from trauma, of rebuilding a sense of safety in a world that had become threatening. The hope, the prayer, was that she'd found or would find a place where she could train in peace, where her journey toward wholeness could continue without interruption. The story leaves us with questions that don't have easy answers. How do we create truly safe spaces for those who've experienced trauma? How do we recognize the hidden pain others carry? How do we ensure that our pursuit of strength doesn't become an excuse for cruelty? How do we balance the need to challenge ourselves with the responsibility to protect the vulnerable? These questions rippled outward from that Arizona dojo, affecting not just those present but everyone who heard the story and recognized its deeper truths. In that way, Maya's impact extended far beyond the physical confrontation. She became an unwitting teacher, her pain and her response illuminating truths about human nature, about trauma, about the responsibility that comes with strength. From which part of the country are you watching this? Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet exterior concealed depths of strength and pain? Have you witnessed or experienced moments where assumptions about weakness and strength were violently overturned? Share your thoughts in the comments below. These stories connect us, remind us of our shared humanity, and hopefully inspire us to treat each other with greater care and respect.